And I was shocked. I was like, 4 years. I was kind of hoping to see like 4 months, right? Like, so this, it's like, it can be, anywhere from 4 to really 12 years, like this sort of transition period. So it can be a really long time for women to go through hormone fluctuations and symptoms and just like not really kind of knowing what's going on.
The midlife and menopause is a period that historically has not received much medical and cultural attention. Often women have been erased from media and health research in this time period, and it feels taboo to talk about it. So this can make it even harder to navigate the changes we experience in our body, both physically and emotionally, and make midlife a time that can exacerbate or trigger poor body image and a poor relationship with food. So you're listening to the Food and Life Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Emma Townsend, a UK registered dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counsellor. I support you to move away from lifelong dieting and feeling stressed with food to develop a positive relationship with food and connection with your body. And as always, a reminder that we are all unique. So please use this as an opportunity to learn and explore, but if something does not sit with you, then it's not meant for your unique self. And if you have any health concerns, please do seek the personalised support you deserve from a registered healthcare provider. And just a note as well that this episode today is focused on the experience of cis women going through midlife and menopause. And we do acknowledge that other genders, so anyone who was assigned female at birth can go through the menopause. But we're just not diving into the additional layers that may be experienced by some people today, but we do acknowledge they exist. So today's guest is Sherry Pratt. Sherry is a certified coach and trained intuitive eating counsellor. She left an accomplished and successful 25-year career as an IT professional and corporate executive to start her own health coaching business. Her passion is helping women in midlife break free from yo-yo dieting and live comfortably in their bodies without feeling like they're giving up on themselves or their health. When she's not helping women reach their health goals, you can find her parenting 2 teenage sons, behind the wheel of a tractor, helping her husband out on their grain farm, tending her rather large vegetable garden, staying active, playing pickleball and curling within her local community, or just relaxing with a glass of wine and a good book. So here is today's episode. So I'm joined today by Sherry Pratt. Sherry, a huge welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
You're very welcome. I'm really looking forward to diving into this episode today on taking a non-diet approach to our health, specifically during midlife and menopause. But before we do get started, Sherry, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and how you became interested in supporting people with a non-diet approach, because I know your background was very different before a career change, it sounds like, and also specifically during this midlife and menopause period too.
Sure. So, my story, is probably somewhat familiar. I feel like it's pretty common for people who sort of get into this space, health and wellness particularly, to have come to it from a place of their own issues. And that's certainly true for me. The short version, I definitely struggled with food and an eating disorder for about 10 years. And intuitive eating is ultimately what led to my recovery. The slightly longer version. So it kind of all began with a separation and divorce in my late 30s. And so just the stress and, the emotional turmoil of that divorce, it led to unintentional weight loss at the time. But that weight loss also garnered me a lot of compliments and attention, as it's want to do in society.
Yeah.
And, given where I was emotionally with my self-confidence and my sort of trampled self-esteem, that felt really good, which makes sense, right? And so I think my self-worth and my identity sort of got tied up in being a thinner version of myself. Of course, as life stabilized and I got through the divorce and I started to, regain the weight, as we are all want to do, because we know our bodies have a natural set point, and I was below mine. But I started to panic, right? And it just sort of this 10-year cycle of yo-yo dieting kind of ensued as I tried to battle to stay at this lower weight that just wasn't natural for me. So yes, and then, as I believed that I was pursuing health, right? But in truth, I was really pursuing, that that acceptance and social status that
Yeah.
sort of comes with being in a smaller body. And then throughout that process, I did make a career change, as you noted, and I became a health coach. I learned about coaching, and coaching was very appealing to me, particularly from the sense that health coaching is less about telling people what to do, and it's more about helping people do what they already know they should be doing. So in my own head, it was perfect. It was like, well, I know I shouldn't be eating these particular foods, or I shouldn't be feeling so crazy around food. So it must be a behavior thing. So I'll fix myself, and then I'll help other people, right? That's often how we come to these things. So yes, I made a career switch and decided to jump into health coaching, which was fantastic. I mean, I love, and I still love health coaching. But as with many professions in whether the medical sort of establishment or just health and wellness in general, there is a lot of bias towards thin equals healthy, right? And so I definitely got
Yeah.
that in my health coaching training as well. So I started out health coaching very much in the dieting mindset, very much steeped in diet culture, that yes, weight loss is probably a good thing and it's something we should be striving for. And so earlier in my career, in my health coaching career, I took a job with a company that was promoting the keto diet. And the keto diet was actually one of all my years of dieting that I hadn't really tried out myself. And so I jumped headlong into that, feeling like, if I was going to coach people on this, it's something I should have also experienced myself. And so, as with most diets, it went predictably well at first. Things were kind of going along fantastic, until eventually that cycle of, restriction and deprivation caught up and just pulled me back into that binge eating and continued to make my disordered eating worse and worse.
Wow.
Um, this time, though, I mean, in somewhat of a good way, I saw that my clients were experiencing similar things, not necessarily full on eating disorders by any stretch, but I heard the history of, this was a repeat behavior. I heard, that they'd been trying to lose weight for so many years, and that even when they lost weight, it was like never enough, right? Like I'd have clients that were super
Yeah.
successful, but they were still never happy ultimately, right? And then, so it didn't bring joy, and it brought on a preoccupation with food, and it brought distress around social situations, and then this fear of weight regain. And I finally came to my senses and I realized it's not just me. I'm not the only one here. And I just kind of came to a point that I was like, you know what, this doesn't make sense. This isn't worth it. I realized that, my mental and emotional health were far more important than the number on the scale. And so I walked away from diets and I discovered intuitive eating and sort of a non-diet lifestyle. And it's been a game changer for me. And it's sort of now how I practice all of my health coaching going forward. And it's just been such a great transformation.
Wow. And I'm sorry you had to go through all of that as well, though, before learning that it's not working. And I'm sure a lot of listeners relate to that. It's such a process and learning like trying all these different things to then realize something isn't working now, because that information saying that we should diet, that we should be smaller, and that makes us more worthy and valuable is just so much more abundant and
Mm.
constantly in our heads, constantly
Oh yeah.
reinforced.
Yeah, that's the norm, right? It does take
Yeah.
pushing against that norm to kind of start to come to a different conclusion.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
Absolutely.
that often means for so many people just hitting that diet bottom. I know in like the intuitive eating book, it's called diet bottom, where I just can't do this anymore. That
Yes.
rock bottom place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Something that stuck out at me, or just like maybe made me think of it in this way when you mentioned like health coaching and not really telling people what to do. It's just supporting them to do, um, I guess maybe what they already know. Just thinking like
Yeah.
all the messages in our world like tell people that they should be doing something, and there's like a lot of shoulds. Like I want to eat maybe a specific, like I feel like something, but I should eat this, or I feel like resting, but I should be moving. So we can lose touch with our own intuition as well. That's a part of intuitive eating, connecting back. But often we can maybe to some extent like know what feels best, but not trust it. And it's all of
Yeah.
these shoulds, and finding that trust again and letting go of the shoulds is probably something that's so helpful being a health coach in the intuitive eating space as well.
It is very much so. And that's where, but again, like you said, it's not sort of our natural place. Like we're very much from a position of, being told what to do, or, and particularly with health, like here are the things you should be doing. But yes, and that's where I do find intuitive eating as the framework, excuse me, it really helps us reconnect with our bodies, right? And redevelop that trust. And so that's so helpful to apply not just to food and body, but then other aspects of health, and start to evaluate, is this particular recommendation really the best for me? And to really get in touch with, what does my body need?
Definitely. Yeah, and it's not just eating, is it? It goes so much
Oh, yeah.
deeper. When we learn to reconnect with our body to support our eating, we're also supporting things like our emotions, because we're learning to connect with our emotions. We're learning to support our self-care because we're learning what our body needs. It's so lovely, like how far it expands throughout our life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving, I guess, towards the topic or the focus that we're going to speak about in terms of intuitive eating and where we're supporting people is the midlife and menopause. I'd love to just hear a bit more about maybe generally like what do we mean when we say midlife and menopause, and what changes might people or women go through during this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it, really helpful to kind of set the stage for the conversation. Um,
Mm.
so when I talk about midlife, I mean, I think that's sort of just that age range, between like 45 to 65, right? Like that, really that sort of midpoint in life.
Mm.
But when it comes to, which is often the time we're going through menopause, and so, yeah, just maybe a few definitions or terms around menopause, because ironically, it's not something that we learn as much about as we do some other things, some other phases of life, right? So menopause,
Yeah.
from a definition technical perspective, it's really just when there are no more follicles in our ovaries, and we basically stop ovulating, right? So that's sort of the medical side of it. So we stop having a menstrual period. But it can be helpful to kind of think of menopause on a bit like a timeline. So at one end of the timeline, you have your sort of reproductive years where you're ovulating regularly. You sort of starts with that first ovulation. And then we end with that last ovulation, what we call like sort of that final menstrual period.
Mm.
Interestingly, menopause is actually not even officially diagnosed until 12 months following that final menstrual period. So a woman is considered to be in menopause 12 months after her very last period. And there's really no other way to test for menopause. We can't like test hormones necessarily. It's really this like time thing. And
Yeah.
then you get lots of different terms. So we sort of have this transition period, sometimes called the menopause transition, sometimes called premenopause or perimenopause. And that's really that sort of transition period from when you go from sort of having a regular hormone cycle, regular ovulatory cycle, to having this like erratic period when your ovaries are starting to behave a little erratically. Maybe sometimes you're ovulating, sometimes you aren't. There's lots of fluctuations in hormones. And that's really, when we talk about menopause, is often what we're referring to. That's where that time period during which a lot of the symptoms tend to occur.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the menopause side of things, or some definitions. What's interesting too, actually, what I remember reading this and being quite shocked. So there's sort of the early phase of the transition when, your cycle's just starting to change a little bit. It might be lengthening a little bit. You might notice some symptoms, you might not. And then there's sort of the last phase, which is usually sort of the last year, 1 to 3 years, right before you're likely to stop menstruating. And during that time, that's when you'll start to see skipping periods. And there was a statistic that came up that was like, when you start skipping 2 months in a row, like you've missed 2 periods in a row, then there's a 95% chance that your like final menstrual period will be within the next 4 years. And I was shocked. I was like, 4 years. I was kind of hoping to see like 4 months, right? Like, so
Yeah.
this, it's like, it can be, anywhere from 4 to really 12 years, like this sort of transition period. So it can be a really long time for women to go through hormone fluctuations and symptoms and just like not really kind of knowing what's going on.
Yeah, that is a really long time actually. And it's also just to maybe not have so much awareness of our own body. Like we've, for a lot of people, we've developed this understanding of how our body works in that sense, like hormonally, our cycle, and then for up to 4 years, I guess, being all over the place, not knowing how our hormones are affecting us at certain times of the month, or not knowing when our menstrual cycle might appear. That sounds like a challenge in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And then all the symptoms that come along with that, right? So that really a lot of the symptoms come from this fluctuation of hormones. A lot of them get attributed to the fact that, estrogen is really dropping. Although it is more than just estrogen that's sort of peaking and, having peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
And the symptoms then that sort of come along with all this lovely change that's going on in our bodies, obviously be things like, seeing changes in our menstrual cycles and patterns. You might experience more and heavy irregular periods. It's not uncommon to sort of have really heavy bleeding at certain times during that range. Of course, hot flushes and night sweats are pretty commonly associated, and experienced by a good chunk of women. Up to 75% of women will experience that. Some will be quite extreme, and fortunately some not so much. Sleep disturbance is also really common. So just, having poor sleep quality. The night sweats, of course, impact that too, because if you wake up in the middle of the night sort of drenched in chills and have to like change your bed sheets, then that's obviously going to be disrupting your sleep. A lot of other changes, or symptoms just around sort of you're feeling like your mental cognition, right? Like a little bit more brain fog, just changes in mood, mood swings, sort of feeling more angry. There's a term called sort of menorage, more sadness, like, and that's what I notice myself too, a little more just feeling, not clinically depressed by any stretch, but just more, blue, a little more sad.
Yeah.
And I remember sort of commenting to my sister, like, I feel like my mood swings are far more variable now than they were when I was like going through puberty, or even pregnancy, which is
Wow.
often other times when we see those hormone changes or just mood changes as a result of hormone fluctuations. Um, so those are, sort of a lot of symptoms. There's lots more. And then there's all the symptoms sort of related with your actual, sort of reproduction system itself. So we'll see, a decrease in sex drive or a decrease in libido. Sometimes as a result of changes, we have more estrogen really helps to keep our skin soft and to keep a lot of moisture. So we start to have dryness everywhere, like our skin dries out, our hair dries out, all of our vagina dries out, right? So that can reduce desire. It can lead to increased pain with sex. So there's all sorts of lovely things that go on that way with your reproductive system. So yeah, just like a wonderful list of symptoms that you have to look forward to as you approach menopause. So I think sometimes it helps to keep in mind that there's a lot going on, but try and be as lighthearted as you can be about some of this stuff.
Yeah. We don't hear enough about this. Definitely, we don't hear enough about what people might experience, to be just aware of it. Even like, even if we can't control these symptoms completely,
Right.
but there's things we can maybe put in place, or just the awareness of, my mood has been all over the place, and it's not because I'm broken. There's not because there's something wrong with me. This is why. And then we can often have more compassion towards ourselves, which can then help with our emotional support as well. So we don't end up in a bit of a bit of a cycle with that. So it's really important to hear more about it in different places. So it's really nice that you're
Yes.
speaking about it. Um,
Yes.
and just all the layers involved that you mentioned, I guess when we do hear about it, I know the things that I've mainly heard, it's like having hot flashes, uh, especially maybe at nighttime, and that affecting maybe sleep and mood changes, things like that. But just the challenges that we then experience in like all these different parts of life, that's certainly something that I don't hear so much in just general conversation or media. It's very
Mm-hmm.
focused on, oh, this will happen, it'll be a bit annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But this awareness that half the population at least, or more than half the population, maybe even go through these changes that have a huge impact on so many parts of their life is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it's really important that we start to talk about this stuff more. I think it is becoming less of a taboo subject. But it was even interesting. I was out with a group of friends, and there was probably a 10-year age difference, which isn't that much, but I noticed when I brought up the subject that the ones at the upper end, you could see the discomfort a little more, right? Like, we shouldn't be talking about this and not like we were getting into a ton of detail, but just even the subject of menopause at the dinner table was like, oh, we shouldn't talk about that. And I was like, well, why not? Right? Like, the reality is
Yeah.
the women at this table are all going to go through it. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. I guess the differences maybe, well, at least in that group or maybe that part of the world as well. I'm sure it changes, but just the differences that we notice maybe in generations and what we're more open about talking about now, which is lovely that that's changing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. With all of these layers that I guess the hormone changes and menopause can impact for women and then the flow on effect to the rest of their life. How is it that it can maybe relate with people's relationship with their own body, and then maybe even extended from that, their relationship with food?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of maybe a couple things here. First, and foremost is probably that association, at least in some cultures, in North American or Western cultures more so, of that association with aging, right? And sort of like you're now not in your reproductive years anymore. And this is much less true than it used to be, but still women were seen as sort of, not as young and fertile and all that good stuff anymore, right? So there's definitely the association with aging, and then ageism is a thing like so many of the other isms in our culture. So that's definitely a piece of it. And again, I do see that changing. I suspect it's far less for my generation now compared to maybe my mother and grandmothers for sure. We are seeing shifts, but I still think that we have a ways to go. So particular media, and again, back to beauty standards and body standards and all that stuff. And like I said, it's getting better, but I know I this sort of example stuck out to me, and it was actually only upon reflection that I noticed it. But I was watching the TV series Andor, which is like a Star Wars spinoff, with my husband and my son. And there was a scene in which there was a woman who she looked like, you know, not a day over 40, right? She was, still had, glowing, flawless skin. She was very beautiful. And she was referencing that she'd gone to high school with this, other character, this friend of hers. And this high school friend was like full gray, wrinkle, like easily, like, not closer to 60 than 40 for sure. And I thought, I'm not sure that they were in high school. I'm not really sure. I couldn't have made the leap that they were in high school together, because it just kind of shows that, women in media and TV shows, we don't see a lot of aging women to the same extent that we see aging men.
For
So I
sure.
think that's something that comes up for us in midlife.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece is just, again, midlife is often marked by a lot of transitions. So if we've had our family, our kids are, certainly more independent, if not like leaving the
Mm.
house, getting to that empty nest. That's certainly sort of the position I'm in right now. Both my sons are just, off to university. You find, life is changing. You might find you have more time on your hands. You might find that your career is peaking and it might be more demanding, or it might be less demanding. You might be starting to contemplate retirement. You might be starting to contemplate, maybe your kids are a little bit older and you're potentially becoming a grandparent. Like, just there's so much change happening at this time. And, because we have living so much longer, we have these longer lifespans. It's also a sort of that midpoint in which it's like, wow, for me, I looked at, I still hope to have, 30, 40 more years of life. And that's a long time.
Yeah.
And then you start to sort of reflect on, well, what do I want to do with that time? So it can be a period of change and a period of reflection, and all these things kind of come together for women, and just, yeah.
Definitely. That's the intersection with, often it's different for everyone, with where they're at that point in their life, but the intersection with all of these physical and hormonal changes that we're going through that impact maybe our emotional capacity and our stress, our sleep, all these things that have these really wide-ranging impacts in our life, coupled with a time that people are often going through other big changes, children
Exactly.
leaving, maybe getting close to retirement, and all of that can, for a lot of people, I'm sure, make them feel a bit lost even. Or
Absolutely.
I wonder, do you notice, um, maybe when people's focus and attention has been like taken up with certain things, like maybe taken up with their children, taken up with work, and then that's gone. I wonder how much space that leaves to then focus on the body as well.
It can be, for sure. For some, um, that, yeah, there's an absence, so you fill that absence with something. I think also in other cases, it you were focusing on your body and now you have even more time to focus on your body and your
Yeah.
food, right? It could be that too. Um,
Yeah.
and or just, I think the other aspect too is an attempt to control, right? So again, maybe other areas of your life feel like less in control or are changing. And, I know I can control my body, or at least I felt like I can. We think we can control our body, right? We have this belief that I can control these things. And so there becomes more focus on a desire to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that is one of the things that we find kind of with dieting in general, isn't it? It can, for some people, show up at times when things do feel out of control. And it gives
Right.
us a feeling that we're in control. And what we know from people's experiences from research is that it actually doesn't lead to long-term control. Our body's going to fight back
Yes.
against it. But it feels like we are, especially if we're maybe not really sure of exactly what to eat without following some kind of guidance, or we don't have that trust. It's going to feel like more control than kind of blindly trying to navigate food.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in particular, if you aren't associating some of these symptoms with menopause, back to like, are you how well informed are you, right?
Yeah, and with the
Yeah.
lack of conversation that we've historically had,
Yeah.
that's quite common. I'm sure that we aren't aware, or maybe just not supported as well.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. Do you do you often notice that at this time of life, like food and body image, concerns, or food, a poor relationship with food, poor body image, kind of shows up for the first time? Do these events and the changes that bodies are going through seem to trigger this? Or does it usually feel more like someone's already been struggling and then it's this exacerbation or more space for that struggle?
Hmm. Yeah, I would observe, I have observed both, I would say. I think,
Okay.
for those that have struggled with weight or body image, and or been really heavily influenced by diet culture their entire life, then, yes, as you say, this is just a period of exacerbation, right?
Yeah.
Um, Particularly because, one of the symptoms I didn't necessarily mention, um, is sort of the weight gain. And the weight gain is actually more age related than menopause related. And that's because, um, our muscle mass peaks at around age 30, right? And then from age 30 onward, this is true for everybody, men, women, athletes, everybody, that muscle mass decreases naturally with age.
Yeah.
The change for women, though, is that there is sort of a, a period of time during which that muscle mass accelerates, that loss accelerates. So instead of being sort of a nice steady decline over time, what we see during menopause is a huge drop, and then it sort of catches up. So we have a period of time during which we're losing more muscle mass. And of course, the loss of muscle also leads to a decrease in insulin sensitivity. That, coupled with other changes, can lead to some weight gain. And also, even if it's not weight gain, it can be sort of a redistribution of the weight. And so we notice that women after menopause tend to have more body fat, and they tend to carry that more around their middles. So sometimes our clothes can fit differently, even though maybe the weight isn't necessarily different. Our clothes can fit differently. And so that, of course, brings up even more, struggles with anybody who's already feeling that, with challenged with their body image. That can happen as well. So we definitely see that. And then those same changes for women perhaps who haven't had struggling with food or body, but now all of a sudden experience it. It's kind of like the first time. It's like, now what's going on? I never worried about this, or it was never an issue for me, and now all of a sudden it is an issue for me. So I definitely see both happening. On the other hand, though, I also, on the good news front, I also see a little bit of the opposite happening, in the sense that, sort of that truism or whatever, that, with age comes wisdom. And, having lived 50-ish more or more years, women they're becoming more comfortable with who they are. So it's sort of also one of the great hallmarks of sort of going through menopause. It's like you start to really just get comfortable with who you are and your values and your self-worth. And so I've also seen this be a time for some women where they're just like, you know what, I recognize that this isn't what's important anymore. This doesn't matter. I am who I am, and I have this body, and it's all good. And there are so many more important things to me, and they've actually are able to let go of some of those previous struggles around food and body. So that's I think encouraging too.
That's really lovely to hear as well. And I know, like, historically in our society, older women, and I guess it's often this after menopause phase, isn't it? Because we're no longer fertile, we're no longer young. Older women are just erased from kind of everywhere, like the media and things, or
Mm-hmm.
if they are, if there is a media story around them, or they're in, our TV shows, movies, it is often still a certain body type that represents a younger woman. They're
Yes.
in the media because they have the body of a 20-year-old, rather than presenting as an older woman, and what we go through. But yeah, it is really lovely to hear that for some women it can be maybe a release from the pressures. I wonder if it's like, well,
Yeah.
now I'm erased, I'm not going to fit these ideals of a 20-year-old woman, so let
Right.
go.
Yeah. 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 And
um,
like I said, it's nice to kind of come to that conclusion that finally, you know what, I don't need to live up to other people's standards anymore. What's important is my own.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder for the women who do struggle during that time, so either it comes up for the first time, or maybe it's been something that's exacerbated, or they've already experienced. Um, there's this such a sense in our culture that, like, bodies should never change throughout life. And we know, as you
Yes.
just explained really nicely before, the natural changes that bodies go through because of our physiology, because we're human, because of the hormone changes, redistribution of weight, insulin changes, all of these natural things that are supposed to happen. But
Yeah.
even now, like within the healthcare space, it's very focused. I hear all the time from people, their doctors told them, oh, like, now you need to really watch your weight. You should be trying to lose weight. You should be making sure it doesn't go up because you're, a risky time where your weight's going to go up.
Mhm.
It's just not normalized at all that bodies do actually change during this phase of our life. And women are still, in a lot of ways, expected to have like the body that they had in their 20s or 30s, even though
Yes.
being human means that there's changes that happen.
I know, it's crazy. Just, yes, that recognition of not changing. And I wish that we saw more of that. But and even I was this isn't so much acceptance of change. This is acceptance of change across even all age ranges. So I was chatting with my best friend, and her kids go to a private school, and her daughter was graduating from this private school. And one of the activities they had, sort of as part of their graduation, was to, more of a joke or a laugh, to put on their uniform that they wore when they sort of started the high school range, right? So they would put on their, clothes, which would clearly be ideally be too small, because our bodies have changed and
Ideally.
grown a lot
Yeah.
in those puberty years. And, what struck me is, of course, you would expect for the men, the boys, they would try and put on these pants and they would be almost like shorts or capri, like the boys couldn't fit at all. And yet there was less of it. I felt like more of an expectation that the girls' clothes might still fit,
Wow.
and it just kind of, it broke my heart. And I thought, oh, for all those girls for which that wasn't true, how painful, and sort of that first initiation into this belief that our bodies shouldn't change over time. Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
and again, I think sometimes we just don't think about the repercussions of these types of traditions, if you will, right?
Yeah. And if our culture didn't moralize weight, if weight was just a neutral thing and bodies changing were neutral, then that would be a neutral activity to see,
Yeah.
oh, look how much I've changed. But
Right.
even if that is the intention from the school, the students graduating are living in this diet culture where they've had messages that are the opposite of that, messages that their body shouldn't change, it should be as small as possible. So it's going to be hard for at least a lot of people to take that in a supportive way. I'm sure that could really backfire for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that was my fear. It was sort of like, ooh, like, again, with more, when we start to consider the broader picture and more perspectives, we can sort of recognize that, yeah, maybe what the potential of some of these activities might be, like the harm that might come with them.
Yeah, from such a young age we're already taught our bodies shouldn't change, and
Shouldn't
then we get
change.
to we get to this place in our life when there's a lot of change, a lot of
Yes.
change in our body, and other things potentially that are going on around as well. And it's not just like physically what we look like, which can lead to a lot of distress when, especially, we're getting comments about
Hmm.
our body, or the healthcare providers telling us we need to be careful, but just in how we feel as well when our emotions maybe are feeling a bit different, our bodies physically feeling a bit different as well. That can make it really hard to navigate too.
So hard. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What can we do maybe for someone who's approaching midlife, and becoming aware of what they might start to experience? What what's maybe like tips or support that can be helpful to navigate body image and relationship with food and body during that time?
Hmm. I think, from a preparation perspective, I think there's sort of three things that are really important. And these can start even in your early 40s, because that's when menopause symptoms can start. The sort of average age for menopause to hit is actually 51. But given that it's, potentially a decade-long process, we can start to see symptoms coming up in our 40s. And so I think,
Yeah.
three things just from a preparation perspective is just to, start by educating yourself and getting informed, right? Because so often when we know what to expect, when it starts to happen, we're less distressed by it. But when all of a sudden we have this weird symptom that we don't know what it's from, it can cause more anxiety or be more concerning. So just like, if you were pregnant, you would, read the what to expect when you're expecting. I think it's really important to read books. I'm a book reader, so I tend to go to books as my go-to. But there, with all of our modern technology, there are other ways now, articles on the internet, reputable ones, of course,
Yeah.
podcasts. Those are really great sources. So to educate yourself. The book that I really like on the topic of menopause is called The Menopause Manifesto, and it was written by Dr. Jen Gunter. She's an OBGYN. So it's a very thorough, very readable still. It's got some medical terminology, but it's still very readable. Super helpful. So I like that quite a bit. So again, first and foremost, like, just get informed, right? The second thing is to talk to your friends, like, to, again, not make this subject taboo, because this is really going to help you realize that you're not alone. So, at girls' night, or in front of the men too, because they need to know in many ways what's going on. Just start to have these conversations, and again, know that what's going on, and then that way it can also help you assess what, is what I'm experiencing normal or abnormal. And should I be going to see my practitioner because maybe it's outside of the norm? Or, is this sort of common? Even if it is common, I still think it's important to see your practitioner if the symptoms are truly problematic for you. If they're starting to interfere with life, to go and find a practitioner or see your practitioner. But another piece can be to find a practitioner that's experienced with menopause, because I heard this, rather startling statistic that something like 70% of sort of like primary care providers aren't comfortable, don't feel adequately knowledgeable about menopause, which
Wow.
is rather concerning and not terribly surprising, given that, the doctors have to learn so much, medical practitioners have to
Yeah.
learn so much. And I don't know about like the UK or other parts of the world, but I know in Canada, like we don't have the typical woman would only have an OBGYN during pregnancy. After that, we don't. We just go to our regular, general practitioners. And so the fact that they may not be comfortable or may not have a lot of knowledge
Yeah.
can be concerning. So the North American Menopause Society does have a listing of practitioners, so you can go find one, which is helpful. So that's something else that I to suggest. So, really knowing that, this is normal and you're not alone goes a long way. But the last thing to do really in terms of preparing yourself is to really start to like double down on that self-care and just start to really be
Yeah.
more mindful of the things that you need to be doing to take care of yourself. So that I think is also really, really important in self-care, not just physical self-care, but mental and emotional, and just, making sure that you're supporting yourself, surrounding yourself with supportive relationships, that you're finding, fulfillment at work, or that you're managing your stress, that, maybe you're getting outside, whatever it is that you find that fills your cup, journaling or spending time in nature, or all those things that we talk about all the time, to really start to inventory what's working for you and maybe what's not, and where maybe you need to be investing a little more time.
Yeah. That's lovely. And I think self-care is something that can really go out the window when we have busy lives. Or
Hmm.
often I hear women feeling kind of selfish or guilty for prioritizing themselves. And I wonder if people at this coming up to midlife have gone through this place where some people have had children that have been their priority, or work's been priority in all these different areas, and maybe they're starting to come to a place where these things are less of their priority. And it can be hard still navigating, allowing, I mean, we should allow ourselves during those periods as well. That's the first step. And then also navigating, allowing ourselves when we have less other priorities as well.
Yeah, but no, that's absolutely true. Like, so again, back to that sort of transition, you have been
Mm,
focused on others, focused on your career, focused on so many other things. And so all of a sudden,
yeah.
yes, putting yourself at the center of self-care can be really uncomfortable, feel really unnatural for a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's, yeah, such great advice. And I love the just getting educated and aware of what can happen, and the conversation side of it is super important as well. I know in lots of areas of women's health too, we aren't so equipped to know what's normal and what's not normal, because we're not
Mhm.
really talking about it, and at least not in depth. So
Not
we
in the
might be
detail.
experiencing things that feel like it must be a concern, and it's causing us a lot of stress without knowing that like a big percentage of other people experience the same.
Absolutely. And I agree, like in all areas of our life, like, it's a little bit embarrassing, but not probably uncommon to admit that, like, I didn't even really understand my like hormone cycle, like just your natural ovulation cycle, until I was, into my mid 40s, when I actually spent a little more time truly understanding all the signs and symptoms. And it was kind of revelatory, actually. It was like, wow, to sort of get in touch with those
Yeah,
pieces of your body and to be able to see, and really start to sense where you were in your hormone cycle. And this was like, well beyond when I'd had kids and everything. It was like, I feel like this is the stuff that we should be taught way earlier in our lives, right? Because our bodies can
yeah,
tell us so much, which I think is, phenomenal and fascinating,
yeah,
um, when we're taught sort of what to look for.
yeah. And I'm not sure of everyone's experience, but I know mine. I didn't get any education around that at all during school. It wasn't anything that was touched on. Sex education was purely kind of the intimate process.
Yes.
It wasn't focused on women's bodies, or men's bodies either, for that matter. Like from what I got at
Yeah.
school.
But I think men's bodies are so different. Like they don't have this
Yeah,
28 day or whatever your cycle
yeah,
is, between 28 and 31 or whatever the number is, right?
yeah,
And it's also interesting to me that for the reason that women were left out of medical research for so long is because of that hormone cycle, because it had such a great influence potentially on the research that was being done. And that's why for so many years men who don't have this cycle were sort of subjects of experiments. So I thought that was really interesting too when I learned that.
that's so fascinating. Yeah, left out to not affect the research, but actually that was the thing that
Exactly.
needed researching.
Yes.
That was the thing that needed to be better understood, because otherwise it's half the population at best that are included.
Exactly. Precisely. Yeah.
Well, and then I guess thinking about someone maybe who's currently navigating midlife and menopause, maybe they've been through midlife and menopause already, but they have noticed changes in their body image and their relationship with food. What advice would you have someone who's really struggling in that phase of their life?
Hmm. So, first the foundation, I think for all the work that you're going to do with this, at any time in life, but really even more now. So is just to lean
Mm,
into self-compassion. To really there, those three elements of self-compassion, they come together so well. The things we've been talking about, just like to start being kinder to ourselves, right?
yeah.
To sort of recognize when we're holding ourselves to standards that maybe aren't
Mm,
appropriate, when we're applying lots of judgment or inner criticism, to start to see that and to start to we're as women, we're so good at being nurturing and loving and caring for the others around us, and to start to turn some of that attention to ourselves. um, that other aspect of that second element of self-compassion is that common humanity piece. So again, that I'm not alone piece. And so again, recognizing, as we've said several times, this is a very natural thing for women to go to. It's something we're all going to go through. So again,
yeah.
remembering that. And then that third element of self-compassion, that mindfulness piece, or that recognition that change is constant, that the nature of impermanence. So again, yes, this is right now feels like a very difficult time, but it'll pass at some point, right? Like, so just remembering. I think all of those elements of self-compassion come together really nicely and can help serve as a foundation. But self-compassion doesn't always come naturally for us. So maybe, digging into that a little bit, familiarizing yourself with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely to me is sort of a starting place. Particularly with food and body, because it is such a triggering space. It's such a place where it can feel, and you've dealt with it for so many years.
Yeah.
So having that foundation is a place I like to start with. Secondly, of course, though, is really to, if you are still stuck, to opt out of that diet culture, right? And to really make peace with food by adopting intuitive eating. So, many of your listeners may already be there, but if they aren't, that absolutely, I think is a game changer, to start to, recognize the truth around how much or how very little control we actually do have over our body shape. We absolutely have lots of control over our behaviors and our actions, and we still want to be taking care of our health. But intuitive eating is not in opposition with that in any way, shape, or form, right? So, if necessary, seek out the support of someone trained and certified like yourself, or like myself, to get that support to really start to adopt and become an intuitive eater. And then I think the last piece of sort of how do you navigate this? How do you sort of overcome these challenges? Um, is a piece that I like to incorporate, and that's to start to embrace what I call sort of whole person health, right? So recognize that health goes far beyond diet and exercise, right? It's not just your physical health, but it's your mental and emotional and social well-being. And these all are interrelated, and they all contribute, right? So,
Yeah.
pay attention to like who you're spending your time with, and that you have supportive relationships, that you are, gaining fulfillment from the things that you do in your life. Start to really explore like what lights you up and what's important to you. And again, yes, we want to be taking care of ourselves and we want to be doing things that make us feel good, but that doesn't necessarily mean looking a certain way or spending an
Mhm.
inordinate amount of time on food and body or diet and exercise. So kind of, yeah, that's
Absolutely.
sort of, yeah,
And I love the focus on that you were kind of mentioning throughout there, like what is health to us? There's this
yeah,
huge focus on it being about what we look like and staying thin and the specific food that we're eating. But that's not health. What we look like has nothing to do with our health. Firstly, it's natural human. Our body naturally does like have weight changes during menopause. So that's a very healthy thing to go through. But also everyone's body is different. We can't tell how healthy someone is by what their body looks like, and really separating our these health ideals that we see in our culture, that this is the image of health, but that's not true at all. So working on separating that as we're working on rejecting the diet mentality that you mentioned.
yes, exactly, absolutely. And that's what's so helpful. And that I find is also what is helpful to create that separation. So it's when you start to see these truths, when you start to understand sort of what is natural, it becomes easier to be like, oh, well, then I don't need to be doing these things. It's actually not helping me to do these things. I can let go of that. And I now have so much more time, energy, capacity, mental capacity to focus on these other things that really do matter to me.
Yeah, yeah, and that's when it can be maybe the light switch can happen when we realize all of these other things that we've been giving up, and maybe we have to find them. It might be that we don't know what they are
Yeah.
yet, and we need to find them to help our journey there.
Yeah, and that's true too. And I mean, I think I experienced a little of that myself. Because yes, when you're so invested, when that takes up so much of your time, when food and dieting, exercising, they take up so much time that all of a sudden, yeah, you're all of a sudden like, well, what else do I do? Where I have all this, I have this time now, and how do I want to spend it? And it can be a little challenging, absolutely.
Yeah. Sherry, these tips were so helpful. I really loved the compassionate approach as well, and that focus on finding compassion for yourself, which is one of those really important first steps that we're not usually guided towards. So I really love that. I would love to keep chatting. I'd like feel like we could talk about this topic for so long. There's so much that we could
Absolutely.
speak about. You probably noticed how dark it's got on my end. We're in very different time zones, and I forgot to turn the light on in the room, knowing that we were entering dusk, entering
Mm.
nighttime. So it's got very dark on my end. Um, but where, if listeners do want to learn more from you, because it sounds like you have lots and lots of knowledge and support you can offer, where can they go to find more?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so they can check out my website, which is just sherrypratt.ca. In addition to that, if you do social media, which is not my favorite thing, but I definitely hang out there on occasion. I have an Instagram account. It's at Sherry Pratt _health coach, and then I also have a business Facebook page, which is Sherry Pratt Health Coaching. In addition to that, I do have a special offer gift for your listeners if they're interested. I have created an undiet meal planning course. And I think I found this to be really important or helpful for women sort of navigating that transition from sort of being a dieter to being a non-dieter, an undieter, as I like to call it. Because it can feel really scary or disconcerting to go from rigid rules and structure around food to all of a sudden intuitive eating means like I could eat whatever I want whenever and not having structure can be challenging. So through this course, this isn't a meal plan because we absolutely aren't dieting. We tend to associate a meal plan with a diet. This is teaching you the skills to just think ahead a little bit, right? To be planful in your approach, because it can be so much more supportive and helpful, particularly as an intuitive eater, to have food on hand that you like. So the focus really is on, thinking about the foods that you like, the foods that you enjoy, how foods make you feel. And yes, we talk a little bit about nutrition and sort of weave in a little bit of gentle nutrition in the course, but it's really about helping you make meal plan easier. Because as I like to say, like yes, for us, food is fuel, but unlike a car that we only fuel up at the gas station once or twice a week, we have to eat like 3 times a day or more, right? We eat several times a day. And so meal planning can just help to make that process easier. And so, yeah, if your listeners are interested, they can find probably the simplest way to get access to that course would just be to DM me on social media and just like DM me, meal planning podcast, and I'll send them a link to this special offer.
Lovely. It is very helpful. I think that's one of the nuances of intuitive eating is that when people first learn about it, it seems like we have to let go of all structure and just live in the moment. And that can feel really scary. But actually bringing in some structure from a completely different mindset and intention to dieting is helpful, because if we don't have the food available that we want, it can be really hard to navigate eating, have food available, and then we're going to experience uncomfortable emotions and hunger cues.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Sherry. It's been really nice to speak with you today and learn a lot more from you. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge.
Oh, thank you, Emma. It's been a joy to get to chat with you today. And I hope this has been helpful for your listeners.
It's been so lovely to share this episode with you today. I would love for you to visit today's guest with the links they shared. And for more support and information, including articles, free resources, online courses, and individualized support, you can visit my home on the internet at foodlifefreedom.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on the podcast platform you use. And feel free to use the 3 dot symbol to share with anyone who may find this episode helpful. If you have a question or topic you would love to have covered on the podcast, I would love to hear from you.